We are live to the world. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. And wherever you are in the world listening to this wonderful podcast, The Global Sales Leader. I'm your host, Jason Cooper, and I have a really wonderful guest today. And I'm very excited. People ridicule me because I say that every single time because I get excited because I speak to some phenomenal people. And Dorie Clark is with me today. So you're very welcome, Dorie.
Thank you, Jason. I'm glad to be here with you.
We spoke just beforehand, and ironically enough, I shouldn't really say this, but I'm going to say it anyway because I've done a couple of your courses on LinkedIn, so I've actually done a few more than a couple. So you give me some insights and some knowledge, so that's brilliant. So today is all about you. You're gonna. It's all about incredible insights from global leaders like yourself. So again, a little bit of blurb about you, and I'm going to turn my head. All the audio listeners won't know that. So Dorie helps individual companies, best ideas heard in a crowded, noisy world, and it is incredibly. Your top business thinkers in the world, top 50, honored with #1 communications coach in the world by Marshall Goldsmith. Maybe you can help me. I'm one of the global gurus, Duke University, Business Columbia, business schools, written, is it 4 books?
Or is it's going to be 4. I have a new book coming out in September from Harvard Business Review Press called The Long Game.
I think when I saw that on Amazon, I saw you've written 2 books of the same, one about networking. I think it's with the same title. Did I get that
yes,
right?
I do have Standout and Standout Networking. Standout Networking is kind of a shorter ebook, so I don't count it in the official part of the OOV, but because it's just a bit shorter. But technically, if you count that, there's 4 already.
Well, let's go with 4 because I like the sound of 4 because it's better than 3, isn't it? So you got 4 more than me, so that's good.
Thank you.
Dorie, could you tell me a little bit of? I'm really intrigued because you seem like you're everywhere at the moment, which is brilliant, and you're giving so much away. What got you to the point of where you are now? Because I'm on a journey myself, and I really want to understand what you did to get to where you are, so I can model the behavior. Really, so I'm interested in that.
Well, thanks, Jason. I'll just say briefly, and then we can zoom in on anything that is of particular interest. I originally thought that I was going to have a career as an academic. And so I finished my master's degree and I was applying for doctoral programs. And it turns out I got turned down by all of the doctoral programs that I applied to. So I had to kind of reinvent myself. So I ended up working as a journalist. I was a political journalist for about a year before I got laid off. It turns out journalism has not been the best industry to enter in the past couple of decades. And so I then ended up working in politics. I was a high-level spokesperson for some U.S. campaigns. I worked on a governor's race. I was a spokesperson on a presidential race, but my candidates lost. So, like a lot of people, you have to kind of recalibrate. And anyway, eventually I ended up, I ran a nonprofit for a while. And then finally 15 years ago, I started my own business. And one of the early things I did of my first book was called Reinventing You, which was sort of inspired by my efforts to reinvent myself and really wanting to understand how could I have done it better? How could I have done it more efficiently and more effectively? And so I interviewed dozens of professionals who had successfully reinvented themselves to try to codify principles and share them so that hopefully other people's reinventions can be even better and smoother and more efficient than mine was.
So you modeled the behavior of, is it like a Think Rich, Grow Rich, where he went around the world at that 100 years ago and he interviewed the most successful people in the world to find out what they did. Was that the similar sort of approach to yourself?
In many ways, I having trained as a journalist, my bias when it comes time to writing books or gathering any information is to say, okay, who has done this and how can I talk to them so that we can learn it? I mean, it's interesting. I now, of course, having written a number of books, have lots of friends that are authors, and seeing their different methodologies, it's fascinating. Some people, like the history majors in the bunch tend to be much more doing research. They're in libraries, they're reading a bunch of books, they're sort of gathering data that way. For me, because the things that I'm writing about, reinvention, entrepreneurship, how do you become a recognized expert in your company, they're very practical, they're very tactical. I work to reach out to actual people who have done it previously, because for me, that's the best way to get accurate and up-to-date information and share it with other people.
That's really quite incredible, actually. I did a program about 5 years ago with Enterprise Ireland called USMAC. It was all about working with a facial recognition company, and we had to get ourselves ready for Investor Rally in San Francisco, which we did. But I'm interested in how you got to that point from releasing your first book to gaining momentum for thousands of followers and engagements, and how you got social proof. That's what I'm looking for.
Yes. Well, I'm glad, Jason, that you're talking about social proof, because it is a really important concept. And in fact, one of the things that I've spent a lot of time on over the past decade is studying this question: how do you become a recognized expert in your field? I mean, anyone these days who enters just about any profession discovers very quickly there is a lot of competition. There's a lot of people out there. How do you set yourself apart? And so in many ways, this was the key topic of my second book, which is called Stand Out. And I wrote about it a lot. I actually developed a course called Recognized Expert. And what I came to discover is that there are three key components to being recognized for your expertise. One is content creation, because you need to share your ideas. This kind of makes intuitive sense, right? You have to share your ideas in order for other people to know what your ideas are. Number two is your network, because you need people to be able to be aware of and amplify those ideas. And the third part, which often gets overlooked, is social proof. And basically, this is a term from psychology. It means, what is your credibility? How do other people evaluate quickly whether you are credible and worth listening to? And so one of the very best things that we can do as professionals is to invest, perhaps even over invest in the early stages of our career, or, at whatever point, the sooner the better, to garner that credibility. Because from that point on, once you have it, people will continue to take you seriously. So I'll give you one example from my personal life. One of the things that I knew that would be helpful to me as I was developing a business was university affiliations. I know that if you are a consultant, an executive coach, or whatever, if you have a university behind you, it gives people a lot of psychological comfort. Like, oh, this is a legitimate person that a university said was qualified to be teaching. And so I spent this is probably 10 years ago, I spent a disproportionate amount of time, literally just days on end working on this, creating spreadsheets of different universities, looking through my LinkedIn connections to see who I knew that was affiliated with the universities, creating lists of professors who were chairs of certain departments where I was able to offer something, and either where I could, finding a warm introduction, or even sending cold pitches, offering to guest lecture for different places, because I knew that investing the time then would be helpful. I mean, nowadays, I don't spend a lot of time seeking out universities to speak at. I've done it, but in the past, it was very helpful, and you really have to focus on it. And a lot of people don't want to focus on it because, it's not bringing in revenue, but it does bring in credibility, and that is sometimes even more valuable.
Isn't that the same analogy as Google, the long tail strategy, when you're planning, but you don't get return on investment straight away? But on the long tail, you do get the credibility, and you get hopefully you get the reach. So how do you think sales professionals, sales leaders in the top of their organization can pivot with that and use that for their best effect? Because I always think it's if you're going to influence something, it's got to be done authentically. That horrible name, but it's got to be done with your own way of doing things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, for sales professionals, the key is, I think the starting point is understanding, first of all, what are the credentials that
Yeah.
matter most to your customers? What is it that they would find interesting or helpful in terms of showing, oh, you actually do know what you're talking about, and oh, this is a person that I should form a relationship with. So I think that, if we're talking about content, for instance, this is huge
Yeah, of
because
course.
people don't really want to buy from a salesperson. They want to buy from a person with deep expertise who happens to sell. And so
Yeah.
if you can manifest that so that they see with their own eyes, oh, wow, this person really understands the suite of products, or they understand the suite of options way better than I do. Of
Mhm.
course, I want to help turn over part of the decision-making process to them. I want to defer to their expertise because they've demonstrated it so clearly. I think
Yeah.
another thing that's big for sales professionals when it comes to credibility is, who are your other clients? If you're allowed to, under whatever circumstances, share who they are, if they've done testimonials for you, it really matters for people because, frankly, this is about customers feeling safe in relaxing their vigilance. It is very hard and very stressful when you are making a purchase or making a major decision to say, oh my gosh, do I trust this person? Is this person credible? Is this product going to be okay? What's going to be the consequence if it doesn't work? Is this going to be a big mistake? Like, all they have is anxiety about it if it's a big enough purchase. And everything that we want to do is aimed at reducing that level of anxiety so they can feel like, oh, good. Okay, I can just like take a breath here because I know that if this other company that I really respect has done business with this person, then I can breathe a sigh of relief because they've, presumably done some due diligence on this person. So I don't have to have my guard up quite as much. And it makes it so much easier to have a positive, collaborative relationship and ultimately to make the sale.
Because from the stuff that I've looked at and researched and read and all of that, some of the best way of doing it is not to sell. The
Yes.
key thing is not to sell is they buy from you as opposed to you selling, because as we know, as the more you start to sell, the pressure goes up on the other person and the blockers go up, and you don't want that. You want to make sure like there's a lovely conversation like this. And from what you said, actually, it's carving your way to be different and authentic. I've actually just gone through that process for the third time in about a year and a half. And the key thing now is building on trusted relationships. So what's your take on this? Because it's going to help me. That's quite a selfish question there.
About how best to build trusted relationships?
Yeah, how best to build trusted relations from your point of view, how you see that from sort of because you're about 5 years ahead of me in terms of how you built your brand and how you've done everything. So I'm delighted with that question.
Yeah, well, thanks, Jason. I would say one strategy, and this is actually a piece that I talk about in my new book, The Long Game, that's coming out in September. I have a policy that I follow that I feel like it is quite useful, and I share this in hopes that other people might adopt it as well.
Yeah.
Because the worst feeling that anybody can have is, oh, this person just wanted to meet me or just wanted to get to know me because they want something, right? Like it's just never good long term if the person feels used in the encounter, or like, oh, there was a trick. Like it seemed like he wanted to be my friend, but really he wants me to introduce me to so and so, or oh, really he actually wants to sell me life insurance or whatever the thing is. And so I actually have a policy which I call no asks for a year. Now,
Oh,
this is obviously not true for, someone who is literally a prospect. They're like, hey, Jason, I'm interested in buying blah, blah, blah. Like, well, in that case, they want to buy the thing. So you have the conversation. But if we're talking about social connections, business connections, I like to have just a real clear policy that if we are truly playing the long game, there's plenty of time for business down the road. I do not want to sully the connection by letting them have even the faintest thought that I am getting to know them because of some desire for an immediate return.
Yeah.
I want them to understand I'm getting to know them so I can get to know them. And once someone actually is your friend, once someone is, a trusted connection, of course they want to do business with you. They're
Yeah.
probably going to be suggesting doing business with you, but it's so much more effective to do it that way rather than to risk a scenario where you come in too soon and they say, "Oh God, was this all kind of part of a ploy?" Essentially. So I really like to be cautious, perhaps even overly cautious in terms of taking the relationships that, the sort of non overt sales channel relationships that I have, and going in that direction at all. I think that you will go faster by going slower in your relationship building.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, I completely concur with that, because I think relationships are hugely important on any level, whether you're doing selling or whether you're just in business or negotiations or whatever. I think having that personal approach, and I think I read somewhere in one of your blogs somewhere, it's being yourself. And I'm not going to use that authenticity word, which has been thrown around left, right, and center. And I think it is just being yourself. And I think it's like us having this conversation now. I'm being totally myself because I'm not registered. I'm not. I don't read a script or anything like that. So I just want to have a good, organic conversation. We give golden gems out of that. I read also somewhere. In one of your blogs, because I've been doing my due diligence on your listening and understanding, and how do you take that? Because I think that's quite imperative. And I think the soft skills, I don't think it should be more rated than it actually is. And I think that's one of the most powerful skills that we can possibly have.
Yeah, listening certainly is, and yeah, you're alluding, Jason, very kindly to my LinkedIn learning course that I have on listening skills, which has I feel lucky had been quite popular. One of the interesting strategies that I share in that course actually came to me from a friend of mine that's a documentary filmmaker. And I was having a conversation and I was talking about, this challenge that a lot of people have about listening skills. And she said, I used to have that challenge in my personal life that, people didn't feel fully listened to, or, they're like, why are you always rushing on to the next thing or saying the next thing? And she said, what I realized was that I have to treat my own conversations like my job, like a documentary filmmaker, because the key in being a documentary filmmaker is if you are filming someone and you rush in to say, wait, but what about this? Or but you actually ruin the clip because you're cutting them off. And so you have to do it all again. And the second time is usually never as good. And so you've shot yourself in the foot if you trample too soon on what they're saying. So the key is giving them space to say it, and then you wait a beat, and then you're able to follow up. And she said that when she learned to put on that frame, to think about it in her own interpersonal conversations, that she became a far better listener. I thought that was a great tip.
Yeah, I like that. I think I'm going to borrow and steal that thing. I'm going to put it in my accolade of stuff that I'm going to push to one side. I always find the key thing of really good communication is humor. I throw it in all the time. Hopefully it comes across okay. But what's your take on that, especially in these funny times that we have in the world? It's sort of lowering people's guard to make people feel a little bit more relaxed about that. So I'll be interested in your take on that.
Yeah, I'm certainly a big fan of utilizing humor as well. We all know, some people feel a little more comfortable than others. Some people, don't do it that well. But if it's part of your repertoire, then by all means, I think that's a great way to build connections and build bonds with people. And it's also a great thing, frankly, for people who are so inclined to study and to practice it. I spent a few years ago, actually. I think it was mostly 2016 that I was doing this, but I decided to really go all in on comedy. And so I spent that year taking multiple stand-up comedy classes.
Did you?
Yeah, wow. I did. I took a couple of classes. I probably performed maybe 20 or 25 times around New York City as part of that process, which was a great experience and, sort of a way to really hone a different way of thinking.
So how did that work out for you? Because I'm quite interested in that now. So what what did you learn from that? Because they're supposed to be terrifying, isn't it? Standing on stage of telling jokes to people, because it's an art. It really is an art form.
It definitely is an art form. It's interesting. I mean, part of the reason why I eventually had to stop is because, you know, to your point, Jason, about like it's terrifying standing on stage. One of the things that's actually nice, of course, is when you have a warm audience of your friends, and you know they're sort of they want you to be good, but they're reasonably inclined to be generous with their reactions.
Yeah.
But when you are starting out in comedy, you really have three choices in terms of getting stage time. That's the coveted commodities, like get, you know, time on stage, because you need to practice, obviously. So one thing you can do is an open mic. Open mics are almost universally terrible and dispiriting because the only other people in the audience for the open mic are the other comics who are very cynical and don't think anything's funny. So you just get up there and you're like, okay, I'm telling these jokes and I can't even tell if they're funny because these people hate everything. So that's number one. Number two, which I just never was going to do because it seemed too, sort of random and demoralizing, is that if you hand out flyers, this is obviously not a thing in COVID, but if you hand out flyers in the middle of Times Square, that's a way you can earn stage time by doing that. So it's sort of like a work study kind of situation. And then the third is what's called a bringer show. And a bringer show is you're only allowed to go on stage if you can get 10 of your friends to agree to come to the show. And it becomes kind of a little bit of a burden because they have to pay to get into the show, and then there's usually a 2-drink minimum. So it's kind of an expensive night out for these people, and you have to, you have to sort of have a lot of friends to
get them all there on the. That's awesome. What did you sort of take from that and learn from that, and have you incorporated in that in when we were doing keynote presentations and all of that? What did you sort of? I'm going to use Marshall Goldsmith. Feed forward from that.
Yes. What I would say is an almost universal law is that the setup needs to be tighter. And what I mean by that is, so there's the setup and the punchline. And a mistake that a lot of people make is they get way too rambly in the setup. They give you too many details, and you lose the strand of humor because the people are like, oh, but wait, was the dress brown or was the dress green? And then by the time it gets to the punchline, they've sort of lost it. So also what's really interesting is that when it comes to stand-up, they are looking for jokes. I mean, not necessarily sort of elaborate jokes, but they're looking for laughs and punchlines much more rapidly than you would ever imagine. It's like every 10 to 20 seconds, you are supposed to be having the audience laugh. So it's all about how do you get to the point quicker, and how do you sort of put in more and more little bangs? You can't have time for a full setup every 10 seconds. So it's kind of taking, like, how do you take one premise of a joke and then just keep adding in with the muskrat? Ha 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 ha. Like, oh, okay.
So that really helps with really sharpening up the brain, because I've heard that comics are some of the most smartest people out there, like Billy Connolly. You probably know Billy Connolly is phenomenal. And there's tons of them others out there, but that must really help because you've studied communication and the core of communication. So that must really have helped you within leadership and communicating with other people in a sort of a higher level. Because once you disarm them in a sort of an organic way, that's really helpful for any audience and any people that you're training, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, humor, when it is well deployed, is a fantastic way to bond and build connections. And as you said, to break down barriers and boundaries that people might have otherwise.
So what I was getting at is probably your book there on networking. But I think that's probably a good way for sales professionals to network a little bit more effectively. Like, I haven't read all of your book yet, so hold me if I'm not getting it all, but I think that's one of the warmer things that you can do to break down barriers when you are networking virtually or in the real person. I'm intrigued about that as well. So I have to ask the question because I know it's in your book, and I think we can all learn and grow with that.
Yes, absolutely. And sorry, what was the particular question that was embedded in there?
I threw a big ball of questions at you, and I was hoping you'd pick up one of them. It's really communicating effectively within networking situations, and especially doing it right, that people gain trust, respect, but you do it in a sort of a way that disarms them in a nice way, and you're not selling to them. You're working with them.
Right. Yes. Thank you, Jason, for clarifying that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, in terms of the relationship building that people are doing, communication is really essential. You know, one interesting thing that I am a fan of, and I have an ebook about it, a short ebook called Standout Networking. I also have a full chapter on networking in my forthcoming book, The Long Game. But one of the things that I am really focused on, I moved to New York 5 or 6 years ago, and I started organizing dinner gatherings when I moved to New York. And I realized that one of the things that made me as a host and a participant feel much more comfortable and confident at these events was when I knew a little bit more information about the people that I was going to be interacting with. You know, I'm an introvert, and so it's not my favorite thing to just sort of like plunge into a crowd and have to make stuff up on the fly. And so a very simple thing that I do that I've seen some people do, but maybe not a lot, is it in advance of dinner gatherings that I would host. And now I've shifted it, of course, during COVID to like virtual cocktails, but I still do the same practice beforehand, is that I will take short bios of all of the attendees, and I'll send out an email in advance to everybody. Wow. And it'll be, okay, you know, hey everyone, here's a reminder, we're meeting on Thursday, you know, here's the Zoom link. And here are the people that you will be joined by. And so it's like a link to their LinkedIn profile and maybe a sentence about them, so that, you know, people can scan it and eyeball it. And if it's not that big of a deal to them, they can just, you know, plunge in and improvise. But for some people who like to do a little bit more preparation, they have the tools and the abilities to know who's there. They can plan out, oh, I really want to ask her about this. And I really want to, you know, oh, I looked on LinkedIn and it looks like I have this friend in common with this other guy. That'll be a way I can connect with him. And so it just makes the whole process easier for people, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, which I think is important to be attuned to.
I on that point of extrovert, I read somewhere, because it just came to mind, is introverts are taken to this COVID situation, lockdown, a lot better than extroverts, because there's extroverts just want to be out there and maybe show off in front of people, but they're struggling harder than the introverts. Introverts just like their own company a lot more. What's your take on that? Because I'm fascinated by that, and how you see that, and especially sort of being in lockdown, but you must be communicating with lots of people at the same time. So I'm intrigued.
Yeah, I think that is definitely true, Jason. I would also say it was probably truer maybe 2 or 3 months into the pandemic, where introverts are kind of like, oh, well, you know, gosh, I was going out too much and now I get to, you know, sort of compensate. Now that we're a year into it, I think everybody's like, come the fuck on.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, absolutely.
You know, introvert, extrovert, everybody's like miserable in their own way.
You're absolutely right. I think you hit the nail on the head there. It's just something that I heard. I just want to throw a little bit of a spanner in the work here, because this question that I like to ask: if you had a superpower, but you only had it for 5 minutes, what would you use it, and how would you use it? You can use it for being selfish or unselfish needs, whichever way you want to use it for.
Oh my goodness, a superpower for 5 minutes. Jeez, this is like a high pressure situation. What would I do for 5 minutes? Yeah, I mean, I think what I would personally do, I mean, this maybe is a sort of a funny answer that reveals just more about my personality quirks, but I really am I get upset about like criminals and social disorder and things like that. Like, I am not down with that. Even like litterers, I'm just like, how dare you? This is like our common good. And like, people are like littering, like it's very offensive. I like people to be nice to each other, and I like people to be polite to each other. And so when I see like either literal actual criminals, or when I see people doing these kind of selfish things like the graffiti or the trash or things like that, it's very frustrating. I sometimes take it upon myself to intervene as a little bit of a citizen vigilante, which is perhaps inadvisable. But so I'd probably take like, maybe Wonder Woman's magic rope and just like rope them all up so we could send them off to the jail.
That's a really good idea. I actually totally agree with you on that, because I get frustrated. I see people walking down the street and there's a litter bin just in front of them and they drop it and I'm going, what are you doing? Just there, pick it up. And I've actually done that, and I've actually tapped on people's shoulders, some big people bigger than me, and I go, hang on a minute, like, pick it up. It's my dad figure going into action there. And I think that's cleaner planet. I think that's
right. You're standing up for Ireland. Good job, Jason.
I know I went off on a bit of a tangent there, but look, I've had an awesome conversation with you. I've taken you all sorts of places, and I really wanted to find out a lot more about you, and I really have, and that's really awesome. And I found a lot of golden nuggets that people can take away from your rich conversation today. So how can people find out a lot more about you? Because I know I put stuff down there, but there's some freebies as well on your website, so I saw.
That is true. Thank you very much. Yeah, if folks want to find out more about what I'm up to, or check out any of this was a recent count. It's a lot. It's 700 free articles that are available on my website that I've done for places like Forbes and Harvard Business Review and stuff. They can go to DorieClark.com. And to your point, there is a free resource that folks can get. It is the Standout Self-Assessment. It is a pretty comprehensive. There are 139 free self-assessment questions to really help you think through your positioning around this question of how do you stand out in the marketplace? How do you, as a sales professional, how do you stand out from everybody else that you're slogging against day to day, so that people really understand your unique expertise and want to work with you specifically? And folks can get it for free at DorieClark.com/join, JOIN.
I have to concur with that, because I just downloaded it and I flicked through it. I went, oh my goodness, it's going to take me a good few hours to complete this. But I would highly recommend anyone that's an entrepreneur, anyone that wants to make a difference in their lives or lives of others, is to go through it, because I think it's really good. You must have taken a long time putting that together. So if I had a hat, I'd take my hat off on you for sharing that to the world and feeding forward to other people. So thank you so much again for having me as a guest today. And you're listening to the Global Sales Leader podcast. It'll be available on iTunes and Spotify and all of those. But for the lucky people in the world, they'll be able to see us on YouTube, so you can see our beautiful faces. So that's awesome as well. Again, I really appreciate that. And thank you so much.
Jason, thanks for having me.
Bye-bye.